I'm a single mother of my 9-year-old boy Ben. When this happened, he was 6 and I was 28. I have my own house that was passed down to me from my grandparents. It's in the quiet side of town with a lot of older people, and I still live here with Ben today. It was Christmas time, and I was out with Ben shopping. I was doing my Christmas shopping for my family. Ben and I went to the mall, including a few clothing stores and a hardware store where I bought a gift for my dad. After all the shopping was done, I took Ben to McDonald's to get him some burgers and ice cream. Afterwards, we left the mall through the south exit, and here we bumped into a mall Santa standing outside. He waved at us and said the usual Santa stuff. He then knelt down to get to Ben's level and asked him what he wanted for Christmas. Ben led my hand closer to the Santa, and I allowed it because he seemed like a normal nice mall Santa. Ben said he wanted a Nintendo Switch, which ironically was what I was planning on buying him for Christmas. The Santa laughed and said, "If you're good, maybe you'll get it," while looking up at me and winking. I smiled, and then he stood up and started complimenting me, saying to Ben, "Your mother's a looker, Ben, you know that?" Ben laughed even though he didn't know what that meant. I still smiled. Then we had a couple of minutes worth of seemingly friendly adult conversation about the holiday mayhem and such. The guy said he worked for the mall. I regrettably mentioned the stress of being a single mom during Christmas is unfathomable, and then I made a joke about needing Santa's help. Then the Santa made what I thought was an innocent joke, saying, "Ben, have you ever heard the song, 'I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus'?" Ben shook his head yes. Then he leaned in towards me with his cheek, implying he wanted me to kiss his cheek. I was going to give him an innocent little peck on the fake beard, but as I leaned in, he turned his head and tried doing that old trick where he kisses you on the lips instead. I moved my face away in time. The way he did it was so creepy and aggressive too. He looked at me and started doing the Santa kind of laugh, but there was nothing jolly about it. I said, "Come on, Ben," and we started walking away. He yelled, "Merry Christmas," and that was the last thing I heard him say. As we drove away past the back exit of the mall, I noticed he wasn't there in front of the entrance anymore. I wish I had taken that into consideration as to what may have happened next. We got home, and after bringing everything inside, I locked the door. Ben and I started to watch a Christmas movie. Our wholesome time together was then interrupted. My doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late for any kind of door-to-door people. I told Ben to keep watching as I went to go answer the door. I said, "Who is it?" through the door, and a man's voice on the other side said, "It's Santa." My heart dropped. I said, "If you're the mall Santa, please go away, or I'm calling the cops." He replied, "You dropped something out of your bag, miss. I'm just looking to return it." I replied, "What did I drop?" He replied, "I don't know, Mississippi. I'm not looking to be nosy, but if you open the door, I can hand it to you." I repeated myself that I wanted him to leave now. I then decided to call the mall management office to report this, but the man on the phone said they don't officially hire any mall Santas at this mall and that whoever is dressing as Santa is doing it on their own accord. With that bit of information, I felt incredibly unsafe. I went back to be with Ben, but my mind was elsewhere now. I felt this sickly worried feeling in my gut. I made an excuse to get up again. After a few minutes, I went to the kitchen out of earshot of the TV. I raised the blinds to the kitchen window. I couldn't see anything out there, being that the kitchen light was on and it was pitch black outside, but I heard a man yelling, "Ho, ho, ho." He was probably out there watching me at that very moment, looking out the window. I had no choice but to call the police and report that I was followed by a man dressed as Santa. I told Ben to keep watching the movie, and I spoke to the police outside. They took a report and were on their way. The police having come made me feel just a little better. A few nights later, though, my doorbell rang again around the same time, if not a little later. Ben was already asleep tonight. I was in the living room watching a show. I turned off the TV and went upstairs to my room, which is connected to Ben's room. The doorbell didn't ring again, but I never went back downstairs that night. It wasn't until the next day when I was leaving the house that I found the note taped to my front door. It was typed out and printed. This is a picture of the note, and it said, "I'll just be blunt. I'm sure you can guess who this is. I didn't mean to scare you the other night. I just had a long shift, and when a pretty lady talks to you after pretending to be Santa for 6 hours, hormones kind of go crazy. You and your son are the cutest things ever, and I'd love to one day be a part of your family. You can't pretend you didn't feel the connection when we spoke the other night. I already know where you live now, I just need your number. Feel free to shoot me a text whenever, and maybe we can plan something one day. Sorry, I know this may seem creepy or a bit much, but I'm the kind of guy where if I see something I like, I go after it. Anyway, happy holidays if we don't speak soon. Here's my number. Best, Jack." I wanted to crumple this up, but I took a picture of it, called the police again, and gave this to them. Since it had his number on it, the police could work with that. They said I'd be hearing from someone when action was taken, and that following Monday, I got a call from, I assume, a detective telling me that the man would not be contacting me anymore, and if he did, to let him know. I never heard from that creep again. I assumed the police threatened to arrest him if there was any further contact. This is a story that took place back when I was a kid. I was probably somewhere between the ages of 9. At that age, I loved Christmas mainly because of all the things that I would get. I lived with my parents, brother, and sister in a 2-story home in a typical neighborhood. Each year, we would do lots of decorating inside and outside of the house. Our Christmas tree would go in the corner of our living room, and all the presents would go underneath it. On Christmas Eve that year, we went to my grandparents' house and then we were going to my uncle's on Christmas. That night on Christmas Eve, after we all went to bed, I had a difficult time falling asleep. I usually did when I was a kid because I was always so excited for Christmas. I finally was able to doze off for a bit but woke up sometime later when it was still night. I remember just turning over to try to go back to sleep, but then I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. My bedroom was the closest to the stairs, and even I could barely hear it. I looked at the clock, and it was 1 a.m. I didn't know why anybody would be up at this hour. Being that young and a curious kid, I decided to go and look. I left my bedroom and then walked a few feet to the railing of the stairs that overlooked the living room. I looked down, and everything seemed normal. All of the lights were off, but the lights from the Christmas tree and the few other decorations were on, so I could see a little bit. I looked down at the tree for a little while longer. It was very large, and we always got the biggest tree that we could find. But then I saw somebody come out from behind the tree. It wasn't my dad or brother, but a random guy that I didn't know. As soon as I realized that it was a random guy, I turned and ran. I went to the end of the hallway where my parents' bedroom was. I woke them up and told them that there was some guy in the house. I remember that my dad got up to look. He came back a short time later and said that he saw somebody leaving the house through the window. The police were called, and when they got out to our house, they searched all over our property. They didn't find the guy, but they did find that our window was broken. None of us had heard it break, so the guy must have quietly done it somehow. It was a living room window that was broken, and I think that I saw him not long after he got in the house because nothing was even stolen. I think that he either saw me or heard me, and that scared him off. I'm just really glad that he didn't try to come upstairs or anything. It still really freaked me out knowing that somebody broke in. It took me a long time to be able to fall back asleep, but eventually, I was able to. That was by far my craziest Christmas experience. Nothing like that has happened since, much less on Christmas. I still don't know who the guy was or why he chose our house. I also don't know if the police ever found him. On the evening of December 12, 1996, 20-year-old Lucas of Ontario, Canada, handed his father, 40-year-old David, a package. David had worked at a beverage packing plant in the small town for most of his life. He and his wife Lucy had been high school sweethearts and had gotten married when they were just 17. David hadn't been expecting anything in the mail, but given that the holiday season is sometimes one of pleasant surprises, he didn't think anything of opening it to see what was inside. After opening the small cardboard box, David discovered a handwritten letter along with a brand new flashlight. David then took the flashlight out of an unaffiliated piece of wooden packaging, walked over to join his family on the living room sofa, and attempted to switch it on. In an instant, David and his family were showered in white-hot sparks as shrapnel ripped through flesh and upholstery alike. David received the bulk of the injuries, and although he was stunned and terrified by the blast, young Lucas rushed to call 911. The recording of this call is freely available online but is extremely distressing to listen to. When asked about the nature of his emergency, all Lucas could do was wail that there was a bomb and, "My dad just blew up." First responders rushed to the Gret residence to administer vital first aid, but sadly, it was far too late. David had been killed almost instantly by the small but violent detonation. Forensic investigators observed that the package was wrapped in white and green wrapping paper. Inside was a box labeled Domaine D, or Cabernet, which used to hold a bottle of red wine. At the top of the box, a rectangular hole had been cut neatly off. Investigators suspected that this was to remove the barcode and UPC, which could be used to trace the wine to where it was purchased. Apart from the flashlight and the letter, several flyers were used to pack the wine box. Most of these flyers were widely circulated in southern Ontario. However, one stood out, a flyer advertising Copeland Lumber, a building center located at 700 Main Street East, Milton, which suggested the mailer might be local to the area. 2 strands of hair were recovered from the debris, but since neither had their roots attached, it was impossible to generate the DNA profile. Ontario Provincial Police soon enlisted the help of the FBI to generate a more complex mitochondrial DNA profile, but the process failed to generate any solid leads. The flashlight used to house the bomb was a Duracell brand floating lantern, around 23 centimeters long and 15 centimeters tall. According to Lucas, the flashlight might have been glued shut, as he was unable to open it when trying to get it to work. A small amount of explosive emulsion called superfrac was used in the bomb, a material more commonly associated with mineral mining. Superfrac can be easily bought from the manufacturer without a license, but investigators stated that it was more than likely to have been obtained via theft. The bomb was also packed with roofing nails to maximize its destructive effect and was powered by a single-cell alkaline battery. The package's enclosed letter was a business proposal written by a William J. French. In it, The letter's author states that he and a partner were planning on starting a new venture known as Acton Home Products in early 1997 and that he would like a quote from Gret on some potential equipment repairs. The author also mentions that he and Gret had worked together in the past and writes with a generally friendly tone. The letter mentions two names, Lisa and Joe. Lisa is commonly believed to be Lisa Irvin, while Joe was a man by the name of Jeppy Zodick. Both had worked with David at the beverage packing plant, with Lisa working as a secretary while Jeppy was employed as a delivery driver. Although once thought to be significant, their names are mentioned in a purely innocuous manner, referencing only their employment at the packing plant. Despite addressing David as if they had once done business, no one in the Gret family knew who William J. French was. Much of the information in the letter had been completely made up and was believed to be designed to lull David into a false sense of security so that he would operate the torch and secure his own demise. One thing, however, was chillingly and abundantly clear: whoever had written the letter was well aware of what would occur when David switched on the torch. As the postscript of the letter read, didn't realize who had moved. Had some trouble finding you. Have a very Merry Christmas, and may you never have to buy another flashlight. When it came to suspects, police were able to generate one particularly promising lead with alarming speed. After questioning the staff at the nearby Acton post office, police discovered that not one but two different people had inquired as to the Gret's new address in November of 1996. Local law enforcement was able to produce a series of composite sketches based on eyewitness statements, but unfortunately, the sketches failed to generate any promising leads. Another person of interest in the investigation was a man named Ed Gull. Ed was David's boss at the packing plant and trusted him so much that he would place David in charge whenever he was on vacation. Ed was also very close with David's family and was known as Uncle Ed among the Gret children. Yet such a close relationship belies a rocky path. David's wife Lucy had also been employed at the packing plant, at least up until Ed demanded that David personally fire her for poor performance. On top of that, Ed had once accused David of skimming cash from the business and had even alleged that David used narcotics while on the clock. The contention eventually led to Ed's dismissal from the packing plant, yet he remained vocal in his assertions that David was a thieving drug addict. He and Ed went from the best of friends to vicious enemies, and although Ed had never been formally linked to his old friend's murder, it's been suspected that Ed's estranged son may have intervened to avenge his father's perceived injustice. The fact that David's financial situation was going from strength to strength may have also angered Ed. At the time of his death, David and Lucy were preparing to establish a spring water bottling facility on a piece of land they'd purchased known as Moffat Farm. David was mechanically gifted and took care of the facility's machinery while Lucy worked on the logistics. Once the plant opened, the venture could have potentially made the Grets multimillionaires. So, it's no coincidence that someone sought to snuff him out before he got it off the ground. It seems impossible that such a crime could ever go unsolved, especially considering the sheer amount of physical and circumstantial evidence. Yet, more than 25 years later, police are no closer to identifying David's murderer than they were back in 1996. Whoever hated him so much that they constructed an elaborate explosive device is probably still walking free, having taken the life of a loving family man and completely gotten away with. A few years ago, we hosted Christmas at our house. It was my wife and me, and we were having about 10 to 15 family members come over. We have a somewhat large house and also a large backyard. Our house was decorated and ready for the guests. On Christmas Day, everything started out very well. Family started to arrive at roughly 11 o'clock in the morning. I was pretty busy talking to people and stuff, but maybe at about 11:30, something odd happened. One of my cousins arrived, and I went outside to greet him. As he was walking in, he told me that he thought he saw a guy in my backyard and wanted to know if I knew about him. I was confused. Nobody was going outside, and I didn't know why anybody would be in the backyard. I asked him to tell me more about it. He said that when he pulled into my driveway, he noticed a guy walking near the tree line of the woods in the backyard. He thought that it was me at first, but quickly realized that it wasn't. He took a few steps towards the backyard after getting out of his car, but the man quickly went out of sight. We both decided to go over there and look. After walking back to where he spotted the guy, we saw the footprints in the snow but didn't see anyone. He must have been gone by then. We yelled out into the woods, asking if anybody was there. It was complete silence. I really had no idea who it could be. My neighborhood is pretty quiet, and the houses are spaced out pretty good, but I didn't know what else could be done, so we both just went back inside. After going back in, I quickly forgot all about it and was busy talking to people for hours. Everything was going well, but then as I was walking past one of the windows that looks out to the backyard, I saw the man myself. He was kind of far away, but I saw a guy walking through the edge of the tree line. This had to be the same person. I yelled for my cousin to come and see. The man in the woods then stopped and seemed to look in my direction. My cousin was walking over, but by the time he got there, the man then darted back into the woods. My cousin saw him for just a split second. He told me that it was the same guy that he had seen earlier, though. We kept watching the area, but he did not come back. I still wasn't really sure what to do about it, so we just went back to where everyone else was. I looked out the window a couple more times but didn't see the guy. I hoped that maybe he would leave for good. I still couldn't help but wonder what he was doing back there, though. Eventually, people left, and it was soon just my wife and me. We looked out the window several more times that night, but there was still nothing. At that point, I felt a lot better about it. The very next morning, I went outside in the backyard. Everything was fine at first, but I soon noticed something strange. The man wasn't back, but there was a new set of footprints in the snow. It was clearly from a person, and it wasn't mine. There had been a fresh layer of snow on Christmas Eve, and my cousin and I walked back there to the woods the day before. We were far away. In fact, I saw those sets of tracks. These new tracks went from the woods right to our back door, then they appeared to go back to the woods. Could the same man have walked to our back door and tried to get in overnight? It creeped me out to think about it. For the next several days, I was very suspicious, but after that, I never saw the guy. I also didn't notice any other strange things happening. I still don't know who the man was and what he was doing. It was December 2019. My fiancé and I had bought a house together a few years ago. It's a cute house in a decent neighborhood, a nice area to raise a family. That's why what happened 2 years ago was all the more shocking and disgusting. We know all of our neighbors, both our next-door neighbors and the 3 closest neighbors across the street. Everyone is friendly enough, but you truly never know the skeletons hidden in someone's closet. Our neighbor Leo, to the right, always seemed nice the few times we'd speak, but he never really spoke too much. I'd see him outside almost every day, either coming or leaving for what I assumed was work, though I never knew what he did for a living. At this time, I hadn't seen the guy in a few days, and his car hadn't moved from his driveway. Obviously, that in itself isn't any cause for alarm. All the neighbors, including Leo, had their lights up already. I found it interesting how Leo, a single man in his 40s, would put lights up. I actually found it kind of nice. I was late to the party putting my Christmas lights and decorations up outside. One night, while doing so, I noticed Leo's Christmas lights out of nowhere started flickering like crazy, all of them, not just one strip of lights. It looked like it could have just been faulty wiring or some electrical glitch. The next day, I left for work around 9 o'clock and noticed again Leo's car was still in the driveway. I also noticed all the blinds in his house were still closed. Even when I got back from work, the blinds were all closed, but his Christmas lights were on, so he was definitely home. I joked with my fiancé that he must have been on some kind of hibernation. Later that night, my fiancé came inside and told me of Leo's Christmas lights acting up. I went outside, and it was the exact same thing that was happening the night before. The flickering wasn't happening in a way that would appear programmed, it was happening in a very glitchy sort of way. So, I figured I'd be nice and go let him know and also see if he's okay since I hadn't seen him. I knocked on the door, and when there was no answer, I rang the bell. All the blinds were closed, and I couldn't tell if the lights were on or not. When there was no answer, I rang one more time. Finally, the door opened, and Leo greeted me. I let him know about his flickering lights, which I just noticed weren't flickering anymore. I promised him I wasn't making it up. He said he wasn't aware of that and thanked me. I asked if he was all right, as I hadn't seen him in a while. He said he was just feeling under the weather. He was acting a bit off. Then I heard something from inside the house. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it sounded like a child screaming for help. Leo didn't have any kids. I was about to ask him, "Did you hear that?" But on the spot, I decided not to. I said goodbye and walked back to my house. Then I told my fiancé to call the police right now. I think Leo has a child in his house. His reaction was literally, "What did you say?" I said, "I think Leo kidnapped a child." So I called the police and said, "I think I heard a child screaming inside my neighbor's house," my neighbor who doesn't have kids and hasn't been leaving his house the past week or two. I asked to keep who made the call anonymous, though I knew Leo wouldn't be so stupid as to not know it was me who made the call. Sure enough, the police arrived and entered his house on an emergency. When I heard what they found, I was appalled. There was a young boy locked in the basement. He had been locked down there for 4 days. The boy had been kidnapped from a completely different town. As for the flickering lights, the boy was a genius and somehow found a way from the basement to flicker the Christmas lights as an attempt to call for help and get someone's attention outside, probably whenever he saw someone through one of the blocked-off basement windows. I reckon he saw his chance to call for help when someone was at the front door. Clearly a very smart kid with great survival instincts. I'm glad he was reunited with his family. I don't want to know what was done to him, but I hope he lives a normal life and has put this behind him. Knowing how serious a crime child kidnapping is, Leo won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. This happened on Christmas Eve just last year. I'm 22 and recently graduated from college. Each year on Christmas Eve, my family goes to my uncle's house for a get-together. Then, on Christmas, everybody comes to our house. Last year, unfortunately for me, I had to work on Christmas Eve. I had a job at a department store in a nearby city to where we live. It was a part-time job that I worked mostly in the summer or whenever I was back home from school. I would be getting paid extra, but I would have to miss the family gathering at my uncle's. We closed slightly early at about 8 p.m. instead of the usual 10 p.m. My uncle's place was almost an hour away, though, so even if I wanted to drive there right after work, it would be kind of late, and I decided not to. Instead, I went back to my parents' house, where I lived and was all by myself. I got back home after work at about 8:30. I remember not long after I returned home, I texted with my parents, and they were probably going to be staying at my uncle's until almost midnight. I made some food, then relaxed and went into the living room and put on a movie. Everything was going well until about 11 o'clock at night. Out of nowhere, there were some loud bangs on the front door. It was very startling. I sat up and didn't even want to look to see who was there. The noises continued. It was like whoever was there was pounding as hard as they possibly could on the front door. After probably 10 seconds, I walked over to a window that overlooked the front door. I was upstairs and on the second floor. When I got to the window, I very carefully looked outside. I peeled back the window cover ever so slightly. When I did, I saw three large-looking men wearing dark-colored jackets and dark hats. I couldn't see any of their faces. They were standing around the door, and one of them was knocking on it. The bad feeling that I had became much worse. I had no idea what to do. I ran out of the room and called my parents. I told them about the situation, and my parents did not know who the men could possibly be. They said to call the police if the men didn't leave and told me that they would leave to come home now. Still, it would probably be 45 minutes before they got back. The knocking at the door finally stopped. I looked out the window and saw all of the men now running around to the back. This was not good. I moved towards the back of the house to try to see where the men were going. Within a minute, I heard the door knobs to one of the back doors rattling. They were trying to get inside now. That was followed by loud banging at the other back door that we had. I dialed 911 and tried to stay calm even though I was completely freaking out. The men stayed near the back of the house. Then things went quiet for probably 2 or 3 minutes. I thought that maybe the men had left but was too scared to look out of a window and see. But the silence was broken by more loud bangs, this time coming from a window. This was really bad because I didn't think the window would hold up and they would eventually break it. Probably 30 seconds after this, I heard the sound of a car pulling into our driveway. It had to be the police. The noises from the window suddenly stopped. I decided to look out the back window now. When I did, I saw all three men sprinting through our backyard. They were running to the back end of it, where we had a few trees and then there was a quiet road. Very quickly, they went out of sight. When I looked to the front and saw the police were there, I rushed out and told them about the men and that they were running away. Unfortunately, all of the men were pretty fast and were long gone by the time the police started looking for them. I'm not sure where they came from or where they went, but they were gone now. The police still looked around and asked me a few questions. Not long after that, my parents got home. I felt much better not being there alone anymore. After the police left, we stayed up late making sure that the guys didn't return, and luckily, they didn't. That was one of the scariest experiences I've ever had.